Thank you, Dick.
So the floor is yours, Mark.
Sure. So yeah, a little background about me. Well, first of all, let me say my understanding is that it's great to meet all of you, and it was great talking to Carol. A couple, we corresponded, we had a chance to talk, and I'm really excited about your interest in this population and the homelessness that they experience. And I think by the end of what my comments, you'll realize it's there's things that can be done for this population, but some of the things we might do for this population, I think, would inure to the benefit of young people who become homeless more generally. At least that's what I hope. And a little background about me. So yeah, I grew up, I'm a fourth generation Northern Californian who married a Southern Californian. I grew up in one of those families where, if the earthquake lopped off the Southern California to the Tehachapi's, my family would have been okay with that. But I've overcome that provincialism over the years and married a woman who grew up in Southern California. Farming family, my father said, work hard, go to Cal, because we can't pay for you to go anywhere else. And I did. And make a long story short, I ended up working in the public child welfare system in California back in the late 80s, from about 85 to 89. After I graduated from Berkeley, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I went to work in a group home that worked with teenagers in mainly Alameda County. We were in Alameda County, but other counties, San Francisco and Contra Costa, referred young people to us. The teenagers we cared with, many of them became homeless. Some of them have been homeless before they came to us. They typically would come to us because the counties had given up on foster homes, at least for a period of time. The children generally had been in multiple foster homes. And at that time, the law was what it is still in half the states in the United States, which is at or around your 18th birthday, your dependency order would end, and you would be asked to leave the child welfare system. You wouldn't be asked, you'd be told you can't stay here anymore. And so for us, that meant 18th birthdays were bittersweet celebrations. On the one hand, a really important rite of passage for these young people. And I'd worked with over 200, about 280 of them, I think, in the 5 years I worked there. Lived with them 3 days a week, 4 days off, and then 1 weekend a month. My first couple of years. And then when I got my master's degree in clinical psych, I became a supervisor of 3 of the homes. And so that was a great celebration. And yet the referral agencies informed us in no uncertain terms that that will be the last day those young people live with you. We won't pay you anymore. Moreover, you're a licensed facility, so you cannot have an adult who doesn't belong in your home after their 18th birthday. So, if a young person's 18th birthday was on their 5th on Friday, we would just sort of lie to the counties and at least let them stay through Monday, because the counties wouldn't fill the bed till the next day. So I've done research over the years. I went back to Cal and the School of Social Welfare there and got a PhD and a master's degree in management planning in the social work school. Done research on a lot of things, but this topic of young people aging out of foster care rubbed me wrong at the time. I took the job. I would have taken it anyway. What did I know? But I had to live with the consequences of that policy. Fortunately, we don't have that policy anymore nationally. States have the option of allowing young people to remain in care till 21. I'll come back to that. But when I was there, that was not a policy, and that just seemed ridiculous to me. And I won't get into the details, but some of my most traumatic experiences as a child welfare professional had to do with what happened to young people who I managed to maintain contact with after their 18th birthday back then. So what I wanted to do is just give you real quickly a sense of what I was thinking to talk about with you, but also I understand you're organizing a webinar and are hoping to do that. And the background, that information that I'd want to provide to an audience of ACLU folks involved in ACLU. So what I thought is a little bit of background about me, which I've given. I'm a professor at the University of Chicago. Just got renamed because somebody gave us much money. The Crown Family School of Social Work Policy and Practice. For over 100 years, we were the School of Social Service Administration, which was one of the 2 first social work schools in the world. And the school has a long tradition of concern with children involved with the child welfare system. In fact, the grandmothers of the school actually created the juvenile court in Cook County a long time ago. The system, so I want to give you a background on the system. Many of you, it sounds like you already know this, but just some basic statistics. At this point, there are around over 400,000 children in the care of governments, state and local governments, because states are given the leeway of running a state-run system or having what's called the state supervised county administered human services system and child welfare system. California is one of the, I think it's down less than 14 now, states that have county administered systems. And if LA were a state, it would be somewhere around 6, 7, or 8 as a state in terms of the number of children it has in foster care. So there's 400,000 nationally. California has around 60,000 children in its foster care system. And I make a mention about probation. There's not as fine a line between the probation systems and the child welfare systems as a lot of people understand. We used to say that for the grace of God, a lot of the children we worked with would be in the probation system, and many of them ended up in the probation system. And then some of them came to us from the probation system. A key difference, the trauma histories of the children isn't much different. If you, the few people have done surveys of children in the juvenile justice system, the overwhelming majority have experienced neglect or maltreatment in their home environments before they ended up in that system. The racism, structural racism, history of racism, and economic inequality that is associated with involvement in the juvenile justice system is also associated with involvement in the child protection system. So they're overlapped in terms of the communities they come from, but also the population. So when I ask young people in my studies, including my study in California at 17, how many of you have spent a night in jail or not? A third of young men, or over a third, and maybe 10, 15% of young women have already spent time incarcerated by the age of 17. But again, these are short spells. Overwhelmingly, they didn't even end up in juvenile justice jurisdiction for very long. But many of them, obviously, they're all the ones I'm dealing with, are in the child welfare system. What I want to focus on a little bit is, because I think this is where the action is around homelessness. I mean, there are minors who exit the child welfare system to homelessness. There are minors who are being maltreated in their homes, are runaway, throwaway youth, and enter the child welfare system actually from homelessness. But I think what I thought you were asking about, and what I wanted to talk about more, was the fact that a troublingly high percentage of the young people there are children. I mean, we've assumed custody of them through the dependency courts, and they're in out-of-home care. Troubling percentage of them become homeless. And so I think the statistics on children between 18 and 20, so 18, 19, 20, before their 21st birthday, who are in care is important. California actually has 8,000 of those 60,000 folks in foster care are actually adults. They're over the age of 18. That's new. Before 2012, there were very few. Most of them were actually in LA County because of the leadership of some jurists, most notably Mike Nash, who was a juvenile court presiding judge in Los Angeles County, and began to refuse to dismiss the dependency orders that the Department of Children and Family Services in LA came to him with at 18. He said, "Where's this young person who live next week? We don't know, we don't care. It's not our business." And the judges in Los Angeles County, starting a long time ago, allowed young people to remain in care in many cases till sometime after their 18th birthday, but not much after that. And that was a rare event outside of LA. LA, as of the latest data we have, October of last year, had about 2,800 young adults still in foster care after the age of 18. Most children enter the foster care system, though. So that's the other thing I would say, is that most children enter the foster care system as young children. Over half the children, and this is true in California as well, but half nationally, are 5 or under at the time they enter. Over 2/3 are 12 or under. And the vast majority of them go home. A lot of people don't realize that. So many of you may know this because it's not a huge group here, so I hope I'm not boring you with this, but I think these are actually really important things for an audience to understand, is that foster care for the vast majority of children who enter foster care is not a long-term experience. 2/3 of them, 60%, depending where you are, what state, 3/5 to 2/3 go home. And the vast majority of them, 3/4 of them will stay home. So that's the outcome. In that sense, we can have a whole debate over, whether we should even have this system. But in terms of the policy mandates of the system, that's not bad. We're supposed to find permanent homes or get children home. And actually the system does that most of the time. Despite that though, there are children who find themselves on the verge of adulthood in state care. And everybody who's written about this all over the world has concluded that the state is generally a poor parent, that, ideally we would love to have children living in a family. And in the last several decades, it's become actually deviant for families to abandon their children at the age of 18. So the policy since I entered the field back in the late 80s at the federal level and in most states has changed radically. From we are done with these children at 18, it's somebody else's problem. When I worked in the field, a lot of the young people were, oh, I'll go home, which of course we had kept them from in many cases, and maybe sometimes inappropriately, but in many cases quite appropriately. I worked with way too many children who went home only to have that be really disastrous for them, whether in terms of more abuse or just it didn't work out. And, it was a painful experience for them. But that's what we did. The law changed in 2008 with something called the Fostering Connections. It's a Success and Increasing Adoptions Act, the Fostering Connections Act, which gave states the option to continue to receive federal funds to keep children in care up till, they wouldn't be children anymore, to keep young people in care up till their 21st birthday. California is one of the first states to take up that law, to the state's credit. And a study I did earlier in the Midwest called the Midwest Study in Illinois, Iowa, and Wisconsin had helped make the case for that policy, actually, by showing that young people in Illinois, where the state, for reasons we could get into if you're interested, but for a long time, for decades now, had allowed young people to remain in care up to the 21st birthday. We compared outcomes for those young people as they transitioned to adulthood to young people in Wisconsin and Iowa. And you definitely wanted to be in foster care around your 18th birthday in Illinois and not in Wisconsin or Iowa. The outcomes were across the board. Where they differed, they were better for the young people in Illinois, despite the fact that young people in Illinois were overwhelmingly African American. I mean, they had other disadvantages in terms of the way our society operates that most of the young people in Iowa and Wisconsin did not have. But they were more likely to go to college, less likely to become homeless. They earn more later in their 20s because they had gone to college, and so on and so forth. So the law changed. California changed with it, one of the early adopters, and something called AB 12, the California Fostering Connections to Success Act, was passed, I think, back in 2010. And California extended foster care to 21 in 2012. So why is that important? Well, it's hugely important for these young people who age out of care. And the most obvious thing, I'm glad you asked me about homelessness. The most obvious thing that my early research in the Midwest and my research in California, which I'll talk with you more about in a minute, has shown that something that folks who do research on homelessness say, we say, if you provide people with housing, they're less likely to become homeless. Big surprise, right? So, it is not surprising to me. I was fairly certain that would be the outcome, that Illinois would look better than Iowa and Wisconsin in terms of young people who were in care at 17, and then we followed them to 19, 21, and so on, at least as long as the state was providing, taking care of its responsibility to be a surrogate parent. I was quite convinced that the young people were much less likely to become homeless, and that's the case. That's an obvious impact of extending care, and it makes sense because what is care? And when people say, what do you mean extended foster care? I remember, sometimes I forget to point out that, that's not obvious to everyone. Extended foster care does not mean that all these young people stay in foster homes after the age of 18. Although over half of them are in foster homes on their 18th birthday. By their 19th birthday, half of them are no longer living in foster homes, nor are they living in California in particular, nor are they living in group homes, or even therapeutic foster homes. If we go back to when they're 17, the vast majority are living in foster homes, and then there's some that live in group homes or residential treatment centers, and those are reserved these days for young people with serious behavioral and emotional problems. It's not easy to get into, let alone stay in a group care setting pretty much anywhere in the country, including California, if you haven't already experienced multiple foster homes. We try them out on you. We find a forever family for you. Most of those families, unless they're a short-term emergency home, to their credit and understandably, will say, welcome to our home. We'll be here for you. But far too often, that's not the case. And particularly for young people who have emotional behavioral problems. And a lot of these kids have extreme trauma histories. And they don't settle into the home for one reason or another. And they end up in 2 or 3 or 4, or in the case of Illinois now, before you get into group care, it'd be more like 7 or 8 foster homes.
Wow.
Where they would try group care with you. I'm not sure what it is in California. I would not be surprised if it's close, because states have really come to believe that group care is a bad thing. And, I agree with them philosophically, but unfortunately, we often don't have in place alternatives to group care that would actually stabilize the living arrangements of these young people. And so that's a non-trivial, I would say based on my research, we're talking a good 25, 30% of the young people aging out of care, at least, have needs that will be very difficult for foster homes to maintain on an ongoing basis, at least based on what we have now. I'm not saying we couldn't do better, but based on the foster homes we have now. And then the other reason that a lot of young people leave foster homes at the age of 18 is they're 18. This isn't, even if it were their family, in many cases it is. I mean, there's more children living in kinship foster care in California than in non-resident foster care. But, they get to be 18 and like lots of young people, they want to live on their own or they go to college. Half the young people in my ACLU study end up going to college at some point between 18 and 21. Many of them go to local community colleges, but some of them don't. And so they have lots of reasons to go out on their own. And so by 19, most young people are living in settings that I'll describe when I sort of describe extended care in California. But I think that's a really important thing to know that is different about foster care for adults than it is for minors. The other thing that's different about foster care for adults than it is for minors is their adult systems they deal with, right? I mean, they might not have finished high school, so maybe they're gonna, still be in high school at 18 and a half. But the vast majority of them, if they're going on education, they're going to post-secondary education with other adults. It's an adult serving system. It's not set up for minors. They go from the Medicaid in California, Medi-Cal supported health and mental health system, mental health in particular, to the adult system. And that's a transition that needs to be managed. And if it's poorly managed, if there's a discontinuity in care, that's a problem for these young people. The employment systems are different for adults. So, they're moving from being a child to an adult and needing to negotiate adult systems, but they're also moving within a system that has no history of effectively engaging on behalf of its dependents with adult serving systems. I'm going to repeat that. Let me frame it this way. The child welfare system has lots of experience of dealing with systems for parents, poor parents, parents from marginalized communities. That's what the child welfare system deals with. It is one of those systems. It deals with other ones. It deals with schools. It deals with the welfare system. It deals with Medicaid, Medi-Cal for those adults. But it's not used to dealing with adult serving systems for people who are its dependents, the people it actually has responsible for caring for them. Illinois has some experience with that. Washington, D.C. has some experience with that. New York City has some experience with that. That's about it. So that federal law changed. Nowhere else was there a serious attempt to let young people stay in care past their 18th birthday. So on one hand, it's great news. We're doing the right thing. We're doing, I believe, what we have a responsibility to do policy-wise is to continue to serve as parents in some way, recognizing that these are young adults now. They're going to increasingly engage their own agency, which is appropriate, and we need to figure out how to do that. But we don't have a track record of doing that. And so that's sort of the dilemma. So the good news is we have an extended care system to 21. The bad news is, and I mean, I have slides, but I don't, I could show those to you if you want, or I could just share a few statistics with you. Actually, there's one slide, if I can do that I think is useful from my study. Host disabled participant screen sharing.
I did. You should be able to share.
Great. Okay. Which one is it? Show all windows. There we go. Hold on a second. I'm not quite sure why it's not. Oh, give me 1 second. I'm going to close a bunch of stuff here.
Okay.
It wants to show me all my mail. That's basically what it's showing me, all my open mail, which is not really what I want to show you. Okay. Now it should work. Hold on. Here we go. Where is it? Open. JC still doesn't want to do it. You know what? I'm gonna share the statistics with you because I've got them in front of me and I don't need to show you. Okay. A lot of these young people become homeless, and so I'm going to give you the bad news first. I've been doing a study in California starting in 2013, following young people aging out of care, about 700 of them. And we've interviewed, they were basically young people who were in care at 17. They had been in care for at least 6 months. So the system felt, some young people come into care for a couple of months and leave at that point. The system doesn't really have a chance to engage them. And we've interviewed them at 19, 21, and 23 after that. And we've retained over 80%, generally around 84, 85% of them at each wave of interviews. And by the time we interview them at 21, and the reason I focus on that is we're still, the policy is there, right? All the people I started with could have stayed in care till the 21st birthday. In fact, and this is, people say, what's the most surprising findings from these studies? It doesn't surprise me anymore, but I think it surprised a lot of other people. Half of the young people in California at 17 and a half are still going to be in care on their 21st birthday. 80% will be in care on their 19th birthday. So this is not an unusual experience. It's not aberration. If you build it, they will come. If you operate a reasonably inclusive child welfare system, most young people, when they transition to adulthood, will continue to take advantage of that system. Despite that, so I do want to say only half of them were still in care on their 21st birthday. Despite that, between 17 and 21, half of these young people experience an episode of either homelessness or couch surfing. Couch surfing is actually not all that unusual among young adults. Chapin Hall at the University of Chicago, who I have an affiliation with, used to be the director of, they did a study called Voices of Youth Count fairly recently, and they used Gallup to do a survey of families and identified a huge percentage of these, like 1 out of 5 young adults who spent some time couch surfing. I was homeless myself, according to the definition of homeless, for a short period of time as a young adult, and definitely couch surf. So it's not, but homelessness means you actually, the way we ask the questions, the way homeless researchers do, like you slept in a place people are not supposed to sleep, like shelter, on the street, etc. And 31% of the young people in my study spent at least some time homeless between 17 and 21. That's the bad news. And that's definitely much higher rate than you'd find in the general population, higher rate than you'd find among low-income young people, because most low-income young people can rely on their families and they have other kinds of support. And of course, these young people, most of them actually have pretty significant trauma history. So they have other issues they get in the way of housing stability, right? They also have, in many cases, although many of their families are supported, by the way, if they rely on family, all kinds of data on social support, and I'm struck by how supportive many of them are able, their family members are for them. But they also have family members that have troubles, right? And they get evicted because they let a sibling or mom or somebody come live with them, right? I mean, these things happen to them. So what I'm trying to say is just an offer of housing from 18 to 21 in and of itself should not be expected to prevent all homelessness. And I see people nodding their heads like, of course, that makes sense, right? But if you're the child welfare agency, it's really troubling to hear these statistics, and you get beat up for it by advocates. And I applaud the advocates beating up the child welfare system for it. But the reality is, I would say, I certainly wouldn't want to bet my retirement on any child welfare system being able to prevent all homelessness among this population between, the age of majority and 21. But that's the bad news. The good news is the rate of homelessness among the young people who remain in care is much lower than that. So for example, between 17 and 19, there's around a third of the young people either were homeless or couch surfed. Of those who had left care, 14% of those who remained in care had become homeless. That's still troubling, that 14% of young people who are under court supervision, they had to open, non-minor dependency case, and they had an entitlement to housing, nevertheless became homeless over that 2-year period between 17 and 19. So I think that's one of the things I want to impress on you and the audience, if there's a webinar, is let's start with the good news, that the system you have operating in California for young people who reach the age of 18 in care, you're only eligible for extended care, by the way, if you reach the age of 18. If you went to jail before that, at 17 and 350 days, and the judge dismissed your dependency order, and you became I forget what 601 or 602. Essentially, we're under the jurisdiction of the criminal court or juvenile criminal court. You would not be eligible for extended foster care. I mean, you have to have an open dependency order on your 18th birthday to be eligible. But if you are, our data suggests that on average, you have a much lower likelihood of becoming homeless if you remain in care. In fact, every year you remain in care reduces the odds of homelessness by about a third. And since most of these young people average about 2 years in care between 18 and 21, I would assert that your policy in California has reduced the odds of homelessness between 18 and 21 by about 2/3 for young people in care. So lesson number one, extended foster care is a good thing. Unless young people really have other options, they should take advantage of it. They should definitely stay in care till their 18th birthday, because California federal law allows young people to leave care after 18 and return. Just show up and say, to the agency, I want to come back into care. There's things they need to do to stay in care. They need to be going to school or getting job training or working 80 hours a month. But they can come back into care, and the system's supposed to give them a chance to do those things. And if they have a health problem, medical condition or disability or functional limitation that makes it impossible for them to go to school or to work, they can still remain in care. So being in care on your 18th birthday is very important. You can leave, but you can return before your 21st birthday. And that support clearly has a relationship to reducing homelessness. What does that support consist of? So there's kind of 3 things, and I'll shut up in just a minute, and then you can ask me questions. What can the system do? What does the system do? What can it do? And again, I'm focusing between 18 and 21 on homelessness. One is, 3 hots in a cot, I forget who told me that, but, basically that is, the main thing the child welfare system does for minors. Frankly, it has different mechanisms, foster homes, group care, whatever. Mainly it is a mechanism for providing a home to young people. And the federal foster care system actually is not a treatment system. The federal government only reimburses states for administration and maintenance payments. So maintenance payments are money to somebody, a foster parent or group care, to provide a home. That's it. And then administration is just administration, kind of the overhead of administration. Services, mental health services, those kinds of things, that's not covered by the foster care entitlement, right? The foster care system is meant to be like a surrogate home. And for extended care, it is as well. And what most of these young people get is what's called a supervised independent living placement. And that was created by the new federal law, the Connections Act, and California's implementation of that. And basically what it is it allows young people, with the help of their caseworker and other folks, to find a place that's deemed safe. It doesn't have to be a licensed home at all. An apartment, a dorm. Dorms are actually sort of waived, they're assumed to be safe. A place to live. And then the young person gets two things. They get about $1,000 a month, and they get once a month visit from a social worker. That's what they have to get. For California counties like LA County to claim federal reimbursement, 50 cents on the dollar, to operate this extended foster care, they must provide, a living stipend or a home for them to live in. And they must put their eyes through an agent of the state, caseworker, once a month on those young people. And that works actually. For a lot of young people, that's enough. But as you can imagine, that's not enough for a lot of them, right? I mean, $1,000 a month doesn't get you very far in LA County. It doesn't get you that far in Calaveras County, where my cabin is, and that's rural red state California. The rents are pretty cheap, but you have a hard time surviving just on that. And the once a month visit from a social worker, it really is not enough for most of these young people, I would argue. But that's where in Los Angeles County, the most common placement for young people by 19 and a half is a SILP. That's where the largest percentage of those young people are living. They could also stay in a foster home. But again, you got to, first of all, have a non-relative foster parent who you have a good enough relationship with that they want you to live with them as an adult, and that you're okay with whatever rules they impose as a living arrangement. There are lots of foster homes, foster parents, I want to focus on that, who have relationships with young people where that works out fine. But that's off the top of my head, less than 1 out of 5 young people are living in those settings by the age of 19. And in my other studies, I go out to where you have people, young adults, and I ask them about their social network. And 10% of them are in contact with a former foster parent, 90% are not. Okay. So many of these young people do not form relationships. The ones that age out, they don't have relationships with non-relative foster parents that are going to result in a stable living arrangement that they're happy with and the foster parent's happy with through age 21. Some do, and that's really important for us to recognize. Yeah, we should do a better job of supporting relationships between foster parents and young people so that they can be in that situation. More of them actually continue to live with relatives. But again, by the age of 19, the majority of them are not living in either of those settings. And in California passed a law which essentially does away with group care after the age of 18. There's a short period of time where you could stay in group care, but we see that in our data. It's something like 3% of 19-year-olds in California in care are living in some kind of group care setting, because essentially the deal that was made politically when the law passed in California to extend foster care between the private sector, the not-for-profits, the advocates, and the legislature and the fiscal office in particular, was if we're going to extend foster care, we don't want all these young people remaining in these group care settings that cost $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a month, because they get paid on a daily basis. They have per diem payment, and there's a perverse fiscal incentive. And besides, philosophically, we don't believe in group care. We don't think it's a good thing. And this is an opportunity for us to end it for these young adults. They should be living in the community in one way or another and not in a group home. That creates a bit of, I don't disagree with that philosophy, by the way, but okay. What about the young people actually aren't going to make it on $1,000 a month and an hour with a social worker, if that, or those who are fortunate enough to have a relative foster parent or a non-relative foster parent, who they just need more help. Well, what you have in California, which is very important, is you have a legacy program that's been converted into a new program. So without getting the whole history, there's something called the Transitional Housing Plus program in California, which many years ago, the legislature appropriated money for providing transitional housing services to young people who were at risk of homelessness. But the focus was actually on young people who used to be in foster care or the juvenile justice system. And initially that required a county match. Very few counties took advantage of it, but some did. In fact, some of the famous programs in the state, First Place for Youth, which now operates in Los Angeles County, but started in Alameda County, started as a THP Plus provider. They provided transitional housing services. Many of the young people they served, they didn't age out of foster care. They were on the verge of homelessness, but many of them had histories of maltreatment. Some of them been in foster care. That evolved to a state-funded program entirely prior to the extension of foster care. I forget how much, at some point, I believe it was over $60 million California was spending on THP Plus. And it was supposed to be targeted toward young people aging out of foster care, but those not-for-profit providers supposed to and doing that are two different things, right? So a lot of those providers, if they're being honest with you, would say some of the young people that the counties send us from foster care at 18, they're coming out of residential treatment, they have way too more problems we cannot handle. And so they did not accept them. The extension of foster care to 21 has put much more pressure on those providers because now there's a program called THP Plus NMD, non-minor dependent. And the law actually says you must, for the THP NMD, you must be serving youth who are actually in foster care. They have a dependency order as an adult. And so you have a bunch of legacy providers who used to operate this somewhat voluntary program where they had some control. They didn't get referrals. They weren't relying on referrals necessary from the Public Child Welfare Agency. Now they are. DCFS in Illinois will not pay, my understanding is that they're paying for THP Plus NMD transitional housing programs for youth in their care, right? That's that program. That's a really important program because there's kind of nothing, and this gets to where I think one of the big gaps in policy in California and services is, because the things that the child welfare system can do to prevent homelessness are provide a place to live, right? And I just told you $1,000 a month, that's one way of providing a place to live. Foster home, that's another way, and transitional housing. The other thing it can do is it can provide services. It can help you manage your own life well enough so that you're able to work maybe with $1,000, can add services, mental health services, behavioral health services, employment services, education support services. It can do that itself to help you avoid homelessness, basically function well enough so that you avoid homelessness. And the third thing it can do is it can connect you to other systems and supports. And I referred to that earlier where I said, that's a new world for the Child Welfare Agency because it's used to dealing with child serving systems. And now it has these 18, 19-year-olds with mental health problems, but it's the adult mental health system. And they don't really have a track record of engaging with that so well. So transitional housing actually checks 2 of those boxes, maybe 3 of them, maybe all of them, right? Because THP NMD, they're responsible for finding a home for you. And the way these programs operate, some of them actually have sites, they have buildings where the young people go live, and they may have multiple units in that building, and others are scattered site. Some of them, and then some of those scattered site programs have their own scattered sites they manage, and others work with landlords. They don't actually control any real estate. So there's a variety of ways of doing this. But if you have a license to do it, you're expected to provide a place for the young person to live and a range of services to help them be able to eventually get to the point where they can function on their own in the community. And they don't need $2,700 to $3,500 a month per person to be in transitional housing. And Los Angeles County, the county you're in, underutilizes, I shouldn't use that term. That implies more than I want to imply. Los Angeles County uses the lower percentage of young people, young adults in extended care are in transitional housing plus NMD programs in Los Angeles County than urban areas in the state generally. LA County has not embraced transitional housing the way that many other urban counties in California have, including its neighboring counties. And so that raised the question of what are they doing? If it's not transitional housing program, what are they doing to care for the young people who are at highest risk for homelessness? So who are they? You won't be surprised at this. I mean, young people who have had particularly unstable placement histories in foster care, so they've moved around. They've already experienced instability in housing because the people caring for them refused to continue to care for them because they ran away from the settings they were in. You know, and that's a reflection, a proxy of the mental health problems they have. But it also creates its own problems because if you move around, the social support networks that young people rely on for everything, employment, education, and housing, are afraid. You don't have those connections, right? So that's one thing, placement instability. Placement in group care, we run fancy statistical models to see of these folks I told you get homeless, who gets homeless, who doesn't. Instability in placement, placement in group care, but that correlates highly with mental health problems and behavioral health problems. It's a good proxy for that. Somebody's in a group home at 17 and a half, we should be worried about them becoming homeless. Check sexual minority youth, significantly higher risk of becoming homeless. And that's true generally. If you go to shelters in Los Angeles County, regardless of whether people have care histories, you'll find sexual minority youth are overrepresented in those homeless shelters. Those are the main risks. Oh, and men, young men are at higher risk of homelessness than young women. Part of that, I think, is a function of the young women, they're more likely to be parents, and that makes them eligible for other kinds of assistance. So that's part of it. And then the other predictor, what I always want to turn and I'll shut up and end on a positive note. The other predictor of homelessness is actual predictor of non-homelessness, and that is remaining in care. That at the end of the day, remaining connected to the system is a huge protective factor for these young people in terms of avoiding homelessness, at least as long as they're able to stay. And I guess the other thing I would say is we did release our report. It's all this stuff that I'm talking about, by the way, is publicly available. You just have to type Cal Youth study and you'll get all the reports and everything. Our data suggests that remaining in care past 18 doesn't just prevent homelessness between 17 and 21. It actually continues to lower the probability of homelessness between 21 and 23, which is really exciting. That's something we didn't observe earlier in our study in Illinois and Iowa and Wisconsin. But in California, why is that the case? That's something we're trying to figure out now. We believe it's because it strengthens the social support of these young people and their ability to negotiate the systems they need to negotiate in order to have more stable lives. So I wouldn't talk that long on the webinar, but I wanted to just give you a sense of my take on this and the kinds of things, the background information that would be good for folks who want to advocate on behalf of these young people. Well, I guess last thing I would say is I believe if we can help these young people, these are young people from marginalized communities. Over half of them have come from families in extreme poverty. They're disproportionately from communities of color who are, suffer in this country because of all kinds of things. You're well aware of that. They have trauma histories far beyond the average low-income person of color at their age. I mean, we're compounding, the difficulties they have. And if $1,000 a month, I mean, if the kinds of things we're doing for them can reduce homelessness, increase college enrollment, et cetera, I think that has lessons for marginalized communities more generally. If we were interested in reparations, for example, we could do the kinds of things we're doing for this population for a much larger population. Still wouldn't have to be a huge part of the population, but the benefit cost analysis we did that Governor Schwarzenegger quoted when he signed AB 12, that was just based on the educational benefits of extended care in Illinois compared to the other states, and that was $2 for every dollar that the state of Illinois invested. We see other benefits in California, reductions in homelessness, reductions in use of public systems. We're going to redo that benefit cost analysis for California, and I'm quite confident it will be way more than $2 for every dollar invested in just offering extended care.
Question. Hi, Mark. What do you think about the attempts in Sacramento to extend the 21 to 25 or 26?
Yes.
Sure. So,
And is that something we should get behind maybe?
yeah, so I think, so full disclosure, I've corresponded with Judge Len Edwards, or former Judge Len Edwards. So, Len Edwards is I believe, Santa Clara County, San Mateo County, one of the Bay Area counties. He was a distinguished jurist when I was working in the foster care system. He's one of these folks like Mike Nash, who, what's her name? Your presiding judge in Los Angeles right now is great, actually. She has her own court for extended care, who's been at this for many years. And Len's one of the advocates for extended care past 21. In principle, I think we should have some kind of extended care beyond 21 before we just, change the law to say, okay, we'll extend non-minor dependency to 25 or 26 with everything we offer right now. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but I think we really ought to fix some of the holes we have, right? I mean, I think we ought to figure out what we're doing even up to 21. The one thing I would say is a no-brainer in that regard, though, Carol, is what Santa Clara County is doing, which is they're doing a pilot of a basic income. That's sort of the hot topic these days for very good reason. A basic income experiment where they're continuing to offer the young people in Santa Clara County who age out $1,000 a month. I would do that. I mean, I just doesn't cost that much. There's so many places in the state where that would make a huge difference in the lives of these young people. And because these young people are kind of already connected, extending the SILP program to where, you got $1,000 a month, there's a caseworker. Hopefully we could keep these people in their jobs longer, these caseworkers. I mean, in some places they are doing that. There's not so much turnover. You have a relationship, at least one, that's there to help you. I'd like to try that first, because I'd really like the counties and the state to take seriously reflecting on what we're doing now between 18 and 21, because I think there's gaps in that. And we should try to fix those gaps, as well as recognize that a lot of these young people, they age out 21 and they're not able to swim well at that point. A lot of them sink.
Do the kids in Santa Clara County that get the $1,000 a month as income they can spend however they want, are those kids also in transitional housing or not? Or is it one or the other?
No, I mean, I don't know that actually Santa Clara County, I think they definitely use the Transitional Housing Plus for non-minor dependents THP NMD program. I don't want to say off the top of my head, they use it more than LA, but most of the urban counties do. But after 21,
Right.
you can't use THP NMD. So THP NMD ends at 21. THP Plus still exists. The program that's not specifically, you don't have to be in foster care, for example, to get THP Plus. And it goes to 24, I believe, 24th birthday. So a county could decide, and I'm sure there's some people, some of the young people aging out in Santa Clara County who get THP Plus, but there's no guarantee because the counties have used that for young people not in foster care, right?
So in Santa Clara County, then, let's say you had been in transitional housing to 21, but after 21, then you, under the pilot, you can still continue to be supported with $1,000 a month. Is that correct? That's correct. And by the way, I should say, a lot of these transitional housing programs, rightly or wrongly, they see themselves as programs. I use that term, that has an implication like, oh, we have a time that operate, we're an 18-month program, we're a 12-month program. Actually, some of the leading programs see themselves that way. They really don't want to be providing transitional housing for 3 years. Right. They would see that as a failure. They believe their job is to work with a young person, connect them to other systems, et cetera, and help them be able to live in the community on their own. And I guess I'll give an example without outing anyone. Having talked to administrators of those programs for many years, they would say, look, if there's somebody who really needs
the kind of support we provide for 3 years, we should be connecting them to the adult mental health system and behavioral health system.
Right.
You know, because that system, if they have that, they're that impaired, they should be getting other help from the adult serving system. And the adult serving system, it's a flaw in the adult serving system that it's designed for 40-year-old people with schizophrenia.
Yeah.
And it has never done a great job of dealing with young adults, where the onset of a lot of serious mental health and mental illness is, right? So I thought that was, I agreed with the person when they said that to me. That was when I worked in the field. I thought some of the young people I work with, they're going to need a lot of help, hopefully not for the rest of their lives, but for a long time. And we actually did an analysis back in the Midwest study of groups of young people at 23. And we identified 4 groups. One of them we called troubled and troubling, which I got a lot of grief from, including from young people. He said, that's a stigmatizing term. And I said, you know, I'm sorry, I don't mean to stigmatize, but this 18% of the population, they really are suffering. At 18, they told us, I'm not ready to be my own. Please don't kick me out of care. They were mainly men. They all had serious mental health problems. Many of them had run-ins with the law. So big surprise. You know, years later, most of them were, you know, had chronic history of homelessness, incarceration, et cetera. And yet they didn't have a chronic history of adequate mental health treatment, right? So that's my point. So I think we got to recognize there are some young people who, you know, at least being there for them and recognizing they're going to need more than $1,000, more than 3 hots and a cot is really important. And I'm not sure that transitional housing operated by the child welfare system, and this is what this agency director was saying to me, he believed that his organization should not be in the business of providing transitional housing for 3 years to these young people. It really should be connecting them to adult serving systems.
Yeah. What other things do you think we could advocate for, you know, that have some possibility of becoming reality, right? Whether it's legislative or it's policy-wise in LA County, because we've talked about that, and whether, you know, at some point we might come up with a proposal that we want to make to the Board of Supervisors, or, you know, organize people to support a proposal to the Board of Supervisors.
Well, I think if I lived in LA, given what I know, I would be curious about the level of utilization of the transitional housing plus non-minor dependent program. Why is LA using that less than almost all the other urban counties?
Right.
Or most of them anyway. I mean, we run our statistical models and we always have LA as one of the groups, right? Because it's such a huge thing. And it uses that program less than other large urban counties, which didn't make any sense to me. And it doesn't make any sense, by the way, to the providers. And they are in an awkward position, right? For understandable reasons. They're business people, they're not for profit businesses. But if for them to point that out, it looks rather self-serving, you know. But I think for other folks like you to ask the question is not self-serving. So that's a question I would ask. The other thing I would say is, what about other services, wraparound services? You know, what about the young adult mental health system? What about housing assistance for young adults? Now that domain, that ground is shifting very quickly in California, and particularly in Los Angeles County, right? Funding for housing, funding for homeless services. Where is the young adult population in that discourse?
Yeah.
I don't know. You know, you know better than I do. But, you know, there are people who become homeless later in life. Most people who become homeless in life became homeless for the first time when they were young adults. And, you know, this is a population that has special help in that regard. But what we'd really like, ideally, is for them to, you know, transition into adulthood and have supports regardless of whether they're in the system or not. If they chose to opt out of the system, because I don't want to be a dependent of the court anymore, what kind of help would they get in terms of obtaining housing, maintaining housing with their own, again, health, behavioral health? That's another question and that I think I would ask, and you could advocate around improving those services. And then I guess because there are a lot of folks at the ACLU who have law degrees, children in foster care and young adults in foster care have legal representation in California. They all have a right to a lawyer. which I think is a huge improvement over practice when I worked in the field. However, in my understanding is that those dependency attorneys, they don't see themselves, at least a part of their job. And I think most of them had never, I'll be honest with you, when I've had conversations with them, most of them, it had never even occurred to them that one of the main things the legal services community needs to do is to provide representation for these people when they get arrested. That, you know, we see evidence from my data that extended foster care was, you know, we're going to deepen that analysis in California. Extended foster care doesn't have much of an impact on youth behavior. Big surprise. Particularly at that age, 18, 19, 20. I mean, crime peaks around 18, you know, starts to decline. But, you know, other impulsive behaviors are happening a lot. Extended care has not been intensive enough at intervening specifically around those behaviors to reduce that kind of behavior. But we do see somewhat of a protective effect on involvement with the adult justice system in terms of convictions in particular, and long-term incarceration. Well, why would that be the case? Because somebody in the system actually showed up at court and said, don't throw the book at this young person. But it's not attorneys doing that. I'm fairly certain of that. But I know providers at this point who are considering youth villages, which is a big not-for-profit, operates in 11 states and has had a transitional living program for a long time, helping these young people. And they were horrified at the criminal justice involvement of the young people. They were able to reduce homelessness, improve, you know, a bunch of good outcomes. No impact on that. And when I pointed out to them, have you ever gone, you know, you ever hired a lawyer? You just show up in court. And they hadn't thought about that. They have done that. Anecdotally, they say that's having a big impact. That just having, you know, having somebody show up in court and say, by the way, this young person is in extended foster care, or they were in extended foster care until they got arrested. Now they're out because they're incarcerated. But, you know, that means, you know, they've had this kind of help, and you're going to return them to the community. If you return them to the community to that kind of help. That seems to me an argument that the legal services community could be making on behalf of these young people.
Interesting.
But I'm not a lawyer, so maybe I'm missing something. Maybe that's impossible. Or
Can you provide an example of a county that has good transitional housing services?
yeah, I always hate that question. I mean, it's an obvious question. It's a really good question. It's a really good question. I would say more, I would look to, I hate to talk about counties because the counties don't actually provide transitional housing. The counties contract with not-for-profit providers to do that. And we are right now in the midst of, through my project, using our data to analyze outcomes for young people served by transitional housing plus providers in terms of, to make it simple, without getting all the statistics and everything, what's the impact of being in with provider one, First Place for Youth, versus Olive Crest, both of whom operate in Los Angeles County, I believe, on the likelihood the young person goes to college in the course of a year, the likelihood that they persist from one term to another in college, those are education outcomes. What's the impact of the provider on the likelihood a young person has a job and their earnings in that job? And the last income we have data on, which is a really important one, is what's the difference between providers in the likelihood of undesirable discharge? In other words, the young person went to jail, they went to the hospital, but the biggest reason for undesirable discharge is the provider says, we're not going to work with this young person anymore. Where the county decides, you're doing such a lousy job, we're going to move them somewhere else. And we've done that analysis, and I can't share it publicly because we're talking with the state about it, but the state's very interested in that analysis. Providers differ in their performance at achieving that. And it matters what counties the reason I can't tell you what county, because the counties they rely on these providers. And some counties only have one provider. This is to me I understand why it's the way it is. I worked for a provider, right, for 5 years. And I was actually chair of the Public Policy Committee, the California Association of Children's Homes 30 years ago. So I advocated for these providers. And they've been essentially given a free rein and not held accountable for the outcomes that you spend hundreds of millions of dollars in California on every year. There's no performance contracting with your providers of transitional housing, group care, therapeutic foster care, none. And not only that, the counties don't have the data that I just described to you. We're going to share it with the counties, but the state has never done the analysis that we're doing. So I know, based on my data, that if I were a county, I would be referring to some of these providers and not others. But I really don't feel comfortable telling you which ones, so let's put it that way. I would say that Los Angeles County has multiple providers, and some of the providers serving Los Angeles County are among the better ones in the state. So First Place for Youth, I think they're quite serious about what they do. They've been around for a long time. They are in LA now. I think I don't know that there's another provider that's been around as long as they have. They were one of the early transitional housing plus providers. Amy Lemley, who's the policy director of the John Burton Advocates for Youth. John Burton, I think he was the chair of them, John Burton, a big time Democratic politician. He's had an interest in youth homelessness. It used to be called John Burton, is about homelessness, but he's really advocating for you. Amy Lemley was the founding director of First Place for Youth. So I would start, if you're interested in talking with folks who I have enormous respect for and trust in, and you're interested in transitional housing, I would talk to the folks at First Place for Youth. And Amy is no longer the director. I think they're in transition to director. Erica Van Buren's the person I work with more directly. She's more involved in sort of program development and evaluation. But First Place is a good program. And then there's some legacy homeless service programs. I'm more familiar with the ones in Northern California, Larkin Street. A lot of these, the folks that do this come out of two different directions. One, this THP plus thing, but the other is homeless youth providers have moved into the realm of operating transitional housing plus programs, and then group care providers. A lot of the transitional housing plus providers, I have mixed feelings about this, are actually folks that have been running residential treatment for decades. They're orphanages. I mean, they were orphanages once upon a time, then they moved to residential treatment. Now they're moving into this. And this is a way for them to continue to get paid to care for the young people they were caring for when they were 15, 16, 17. And I hope that they're doing a good job. But again, California has not, up until now, to their credit, I think the CDSS is interested in starting to look at these outcomes and compare between counties and between providers. So let's learn who's doing well and learn from the high flyers and help the ones that are not doing as well.
I think I sent you some data that we just pulled off the website of one of the providers, showing that, they said something like, if you look at all the kids that, graduate from foster care at age 18, ultimately a very large proportion, maybe 40%, end up homeless at some point. Does that jive with your data?
Yeah, so I don't have it here in front of me. You sent me that. Some of those statistics I would say are accurate. Some of them were not. Okay. I think the best data, if somebody has better data, they show it to me. But I think the best data on homeless trajectories of young people aging out of care come from the Midwest study in Cal Youth. And the Midwest study, which had 3 states, we did find, we went all the way out to 26, and we found there, depending on how you counted it, because some youth we didn't observe it everywhere. We didn't talk to them at every way. They could have been homeless, and we have reason to believe that it's harder to find homeless people than non-homeless people. But we estimate that between, I think, around 1/3 and 45% of young people aging out of foster care will become homeless sometime between the age of 18 and I think it was 23 as far as we went out. Okay. That being said, most of that homelessness happens shortly after they exit care, right? So that's why in the Midwest study, there was a big difference in homelessness between Iowa and Wisconsin and Illinois up to 21, right? Because Illinois provided. But a lot of the young people aging out of foster care at 21 and homeless at 21 became homeless in the next 6 months. Yeah. But, you know, often the statistic gets thrown out there. What gets confused is they'll say 40% of them become homeless within like 6 months or a year. That's just not true.
Yeah.
There's no decent study that shows that rate of homelessness of young people aging out of care. I did make some notes when you sent me that, Carol. I'll send it back and tell you the ones that I have trouble with, you know.
Yeah, no, I pulled the data off of the Right Way for Children's website.
Uh-huh.
Complicated because, you know, you have to really see what's behind the data. But it says, you know, of the kids that reach 18 and are aging out of foster care, 72% are not stably housed. Now that could mean they've gone into transitional housing, they've gone out, you know, they stayed with families, they've gone to other arrangements, right? I guess, you know, so one of the things we're trying to get our hands around is where should we focus on what the biggest concern is here, because we started out with the concern that, you know, it seems like a large proportion of the kids aging out of foster care, whether it's they're 18 or they're 21, is that they ultimately end up homeless. And, you know, and we have been focusing our initiatives around the whole housing issue anyway in LA County. And we've had one webinar on that. And obviously we have a gigantic homeless problem here. And a good proportion of those are kids. So, you know, we were just trying to see, you know, could we make that connection, get the right information, instead of make the case that foster care is really, you know, pushing kids into homelessness, or as you pointed out, it's a much more complicated situation than that.
Yeah, so that's where I think you want to be careful, right? Because well, for a couple of reasons. One, it's inaccurate, but secondly, it undermines the argument, right? If we're saying foster care drives people in homelessness, and well, again, why would we want to help foster care, right? I mean, so I think that I generally start my conversations about the system is, I don't think anybody wants their kid in foster care, right? I mean, it's, you know, there's no way to make foster care non-stigmatizing, et cetera. That being said, if we get to the point where a young person has reached the age of majority in foster care, we haven't come up with another way that's better than just allowing them to continue to take advantage of the system. This is why my response to your question about should we continue foster care at 21? I mean, I don't think we should continue it exactly the way it operates before 18 for sure. And I think we still need to figure out how to do a better job with young adults. But I think it's one thing to say homelessness among foster children is enough of a problem that we should be concerned about it. That's absolutely true. Whether it's a quarter or 45% become homeless at some point. The fact that 14% of young people in California who stay in care become homeless means we need to do more for young people who are in care. But the young people who left care, over a third of them became homeless, right? So that's all I'm saying is that if we're going to say, oh, you know, we don't need, you know, extended care, we don't want them in the system. Well, what are we doing for these young people who left the system that are more than twice as likely to become homeless? The statistics that shelter providers often provide, or the criminal justice system, they'll, you know, there have been surveys where they'll go and they'll talk to folks in juvenile probation or even the adult correction system, and you'll find a very large percentage of them were in foster care.
Right.
They'll say that, right? What people don't get at is, when were you in foster care? And I already told you, half the children entering foster care enter under the age of 5, and the vast majority of them go home, right? So if somebody told them my mother was in foster care as a little kid, right? You know, but she would be the first to tell you, but I didn't have anything to do with whatever happened to me later. You know, I mean, I came from a poor family. My mother left our family, right? So I think this is the thing I'm wary about, is foster care caused the problem. And you know, it's understandable people would say that. If you're running a shelter, a lot of the young people you're dealing with have been in foster care, but relatively few of them actually came directly from foster care. Some did. That used to be particularly true when I worked in the field, because at 18, I actually drove some young people to the shelter.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I took them to the welfare office before that. I did everything I could. We did everything we could to connect them to adult serving systems because we knew we were going to render them homeless at 18. You don't have to do that anymore, right? So I think you know, if you want to fix the foster care system for teenagers,
Yeah.
right? I mean, people aren't becoming homeless from the foster care system until they're, you know, well into their teens for all kinds of obvious reasons, right? I mean, they run away, they go back. That's a much more complicated question than trying to make sure that if young people actually reach the age of majority, you know, you're preventing homelessness. And the homelessness happens after they're 18 by definition. Before that, they're runaway youth. And we bring them right back to the system. The system's obligated to take them back. So the other thing I would say is there's only 2,800 people in extended foster care in LA County. And I haven't looked at the point in time estimates recently, but I'm pretty sure there's a heck of a lot more people between 18 and 20 in Los Angeles County who are homeless on a given night than there are, you know, than the 14% or even 30% of 2,800, you know, kids in care who become homeless at some point later, right? So foster care is not driving your homeless young adult problem. In fact, for the ones that were in care, and I suspect if you went out on the street and talked to a lot of street homeless people between 18 and 21 and said, oh, we have this cool program, it's called foster care. You can go and they'll give you $1,000 a month and you have to talk to a foster or social worker once a week. Sign me up, right? So that's the dilemma here, I think, is that that's why I said, I think, why not do that?
Right.
I mean, I'm hoping that our research on foster youth not only improves the foster care system, but it makes the case for some more fundamental supports for young people in that age group who really don't come from the 10%, you know, or even the top half. Because if they don't, and they live in California, either they're doubled up with their family or tripled up with their family, or they're unstably housed, right? I mean, the percentage of young people between 18 and 21, and I say your state, it's gonna be my state pretty damn quick, who are spending more than 50% of their income on housing is scary, right? So this is a population that we are our kids, right? That's the way I talk about it. I say, you know, it's a manageable population. They're your responsibility. If you don't believe that they're your responsibility, you should go out and change the law and get rid of our foster care system or get rid of extended foster care, which that law passed. I think there were 3 people who voted no for the Fostering Connections Act.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, Rand Paul, probably a couple other libertarians. I mean, Congress, you know, it's compassionate conservatism to extend foster care to 21. It's kind of stunning that half the states still haven't done it.
Yeah.
But the Congress, nobody in Congress wanted to say no to that.
Yeah.
You know, so I think, you know, we can do better for these young people. And that we can learn from that to do better for young people more broadly who, you know, my daughters were not going to become homeless because they would come back and live with me.
Yeah.
You know, but there are a lot of young people who they don't have that going for them. It's not just kids in foster care.
Well, this has been extremely helpful. I don't know if anybody else has a last question or two. We've taken a lot of your time, Mark.
I do have a question.
Go, Vinny.
Mark, based on the data you've collected, and obviously you've borne out the fact that correlation does not prove causation, that the foster care system doesn't cause homelessness, it's just associated with it. Based on your data, we're activists, and we're going to be looking for activities or efforts that the people that attend the webinar could attend. What would you say would be the thing, or the, better yet, 3 things that we could work on or that we could advocate for or fight for based on the data you found to improve the system, to improve the lives of the children that are in it?
Well, you know, one thing I would say, and this applies to homelessness, and because I worked with older adolescents, I would say, if it's possible for you personally to foster a teenager, do it. I mean, that is, we don't have enough foster parents for teenagers, let alone young adults. And if we're going to have homes that would continue to be homes forever families, like the term we like to use, but even short of forever, through young adulthood homes, we need to have folks fostering teenagers. If you can't do it, maybe through a faith community you're part of, or parent teacher, or whatever, you can reach out to DCFS and the not-for-profits in your community, because one of the great things California has is for minors is what are called foster family agencies. Essentially, it has a funding mechanism for private foster care agencies, and they used to be called home finding agencies 50 years ago, 60 years ago. But they get paid better than the counties. Counties hate that, many of them. We can't recruit foster parents because these private agencies, but those private agencies, they support foster parents. So the first thing I would say is that we need foster parents, and we need supports for foster parents. We need the counties and the state to invest in training foster parents, providing training foster parents to deal with youth with trauma histories who are difficult to care for. We need respite care for those foster parents. And we need other kinds of support, people to go in the home and give you a break, like a respite. But even having people that come into the home not to give you a break, but just because they're mental health professionals and can help you with an adolescent who has problems, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is again, if you're professionals and you're able to advocate around systems that deal with young adults, to try to reform those systems, that deal with adults, to try to focus on getting systems that serve adults to focus on young adults. They don't. The healthcare system doesn't, the employment system doesn't, the legal system doesn't. It doesn't distinguish really between 19, 20. I mean, there's big debate about that. I'm involved in it as well, changing the age of juvenile court to 21. Is that a good idea? But that issue of the transition to adulthood and how we get systems to focus in a more developmentally appropriate way on young adults as a period of opportunity that we should deal with uniquely. This is when most people, particularly low-income people, have their first kid. 1/2 of TANF recipients, temporary assistance in needy families, had their first child when they were, between 18 and 23. Right? This should be seen as an opportunity. Not like, oh my God, the welfare program has all these people starting in. Well, yeah, that's an opportunity. Guess what? That's a mom generally with a child. We could, and guess what? Big overlap with the child welfare system.
Prevent those people from becoming the 40-year-old schizophrenics that you mentioned.
Well, right. I mean, that's exactly that. And a lot of these young people have serious mental health problems, right? I mean, the interface between genes and the environment is not good for that vast majority of these young people. I mean, from birth onward in many cases, despite the best efforts of their parents. And in many cases, the parents are the problem. I have to say, though, the other thing I forgot to say, and I would say this to you, I think everyone should understand, vast majority of children in the child welfare system, regardless of age, come in because of neglect.
Right.
And poverty has everything to do with that. Less than 1/3 of children entering your system enter because of physical or sexual abuse.
Really?
They don't even have an allegation of physical or sexual abuse. Vast majority, physical neglect. I was just looking at the data yesterday. Caretaker absence or incapacity is the reason for entry for 1/10 of the young people in my study, 18-year-olds, right? They went into care because the state could, the county, the court, the parent was either they're incarcerated or otherwise absent or incapacitated. And the state had no choice but to take the child away, right? So neglect is the reason that we have all these children coming in foster care. Physical and sexual abuse, very important, but they do not drive this system. Extreme poverty does, and everything that goes with it.
That's exactly what I told the committee a week or two ago. Nothing's changed, from 50 years ago. I hate to say it that long ago, since I ran the child welfare system in New York City.
That's right.
The same statistics apply. The vast majority of kids, they're poor and they're neglected. They go to school dirty. They don't have meals. The parents are absent. The parents have drug problems, whatever, but they're not necessarily physically abused. Yeah, and that's interesting. I mean, nothing's changed, right?
Isn't that the magic of the free market?
Same social forces
Yeah, right.
driving these kids into the foster care system that existed 50 years ago.
That's
So-
right.
so Mark,
Neoliberalism
Mark-
has not made it better. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
Mark, I wanted to thank you. I thought this was fascinating. This was actually kind of heartening to me in the sense that I came in here with the uninformed notion that really the foster care system was feeding a lot of homelessness based on reading some headlines. So it seems that that's not really the case, and I appreciate you taking all this time to educate us about it.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, we could do better, right? And are there cases of, does the system fail? Are there places where if we've done X instead of Y, the young person wouldn't become homeless? Absolutely. But on balance, particularly with the extended care policy, we're way better off having that than not having.
And not.
And I think the lesson now is let's learn how to do it better.
Yeah, my experience with this, for 2 decades, I was involved in helping run a nonprofit halfway house for alcoholics and addicts, including a couple of years where I lived there and ran it. And a fair number of the fellows who came were homeless and reported being foster care. So I had this notion that they were kind of on a pipeline, and I'm sure maybe some of the ones that I met were, but it doesn't seem like that's the main way things happen.
Yeah, I'll just conclude by saying I've been asking a question that a lady named Trudy Festinger is still around. who's
I
a-
just emailed her the other day.
You know, Trudy,
Get a
yeah.
copy of her old study. And she's-
Yeah. Trudy Festinger did
I
a
couldn't
study
get-
like mine in New York City back in the late 70s.
Right.
And I've been asking questions she asked. I feel lucky to have been in foster care. There are other questions, like the social workers who work with me have been very helpful. The foster parents work with me great. But that one question, I feel lucky to be placed in foster care. There's been almost no change in the percentage of young people where we bother to do a good representative study. She did one in New York. I did one in Wisconsin in the early 90s. I did a follow-up in Wisconsin with the other 2 states, Iowa and Illinois. And then in California, 2/3 of the young people agree or strongly agree with the statement, I feel lucky to have been placed in foster care. A third of them either are neutral or disagree, right? So I'm not saying that we don't have a long way to go. But I think if a lot of people, you bump up against the system, you talk to people, particularly advocates who want to make it better, they're not going to tell you that. 2/3 of the young people basically feel like, you know what? I was lucky. And more than that, 90% of them would say foster parents looked out for me. Even the ones that bounced around to say they were doing the best they could. I just wasn't going to work. They couldn't put up with me, or I couldn't put up with them. So yeah, we need to do better, but the system isn't going away. And the young people in it, if we asked them, wouldn't tell us to make it go away.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Carol. I'll distribute the link and we can all share it with others.
Right.
Very nice to meet you, Mark. Thank
Mark,
you so much.
thank you very, very much.
Yeah,
It was
my
excellent.
pleasure.
I
Great.
emailed you both of those webinars, so you can check them out. Check out Code Pink. Are you familiar with Code Pink?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. They put on great webinars every Tuesday that are fabulous, and this last one was no exception.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate the connection.
Yeah.
We look forward to having you back in California.
Yes.
Yeah, be there soon. We're driving out this summer, so, okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.